for the first time, this live stream is for you, for the nurse educator, to support and serve your needs and to empower you with educational best practices and strategies to, again, strengthen the way nursing is taught to better prepare our students for both practice and licensure. And if we haven't met, my name is Keith. I'm the founder of Keith RN. And as the founder of Keith RN, my why or vision is to lead the changes that are needed right now in nursing education to better prepare our students for practice, to close the ongoing gap between how nursing is taught and practiced, so our students graduate with the skills for safe patient care, clinical judgment, communication, to better prepare them for practice. But if you were to dig a little bit deeper into my why and why I've been doing this for the last 12 years, and even why we're here tonight on a Facebook Live, where many of you could be doing something different, as could I, our mission at Keith RN is really this: transforming nursing education one educator at a time. Because every nurse educator matters. You matter to Keith RN, you matter to your students, you matter to your program, but most importantly, you matter to God, who created you in his image and has put a calling and a heart and a purpose in your life to do what you do. For many of you, that's why you're nurse educators. And so I'm just blessed to be able to come to you tonight and just want to say, hey, if you're joining us tonight, please just start the conversation. I've got a chat here. Just put your name as well as your where you're coming from tonight, and just would love to kind of just call you out as well as just recognize and acknowledge that you're here tonight. Want you to know that tonight's topic, we're going to have a follow-up to our last month's topic with Maria Flores-Harris, where we talked about academic cheating and the culture in nursing education. We're going to kind of go in a slightly different but yet complementary direction, where we're going to be talking about valuing learning and the learning process over performance as it relates to testing, and how these two dynamics can kind of basically sometimes adversely impact the learning environments for our students. And so it's going to be a wonderful topic, and I'm glad you're here tonight. Last month, as I shared, we talked about academic misconduct. Let's just call it what it is. As Maria would say, it's cheating. And how do we change the culture in nursing education? And what's really kind of an interesting parallel is that what are nursing educators sometimes doing to contribute to that culture? And so I want you to know that if you missed that Facebook Live, go ahead and join us in that discussion. It was the easiest channel for you to access prior Facebook Lives that we do is on the YouTube channel of Keith RN, which is Think Like a Nurse. And so if you're not currently receiving our updates, as well as kind of automatically notifying what we're receiving, here is the YouTube channel, Think Like a Nurse, and just want you to know that you can subscribe, get access to that, as well as another option for social media that we have available is we have a Facebook group at Keith RN called Think Like a Nurse. So actually, it's Teachers Transforming Nursing Education. And that Facebook group is over 16,000 nurse educators from around the world supporting each other, providing a caring community and an opportunity for nurse educators to really gather and support. And if you have questions, challenges, it's a safe place to answer those questions and to be a part of that conversation. And so as we look at talking about valuing teaching and learning over performance, we got to kind of look at, are the current strategies that we're doing in nursing education, are they working? Because when you look at the current gap between how nursing is taught and practiced, the literature calls it a fancy word, the academic practice gap. And that gap or disconnect has been present for almost 50 years in nursing education. And it's been documented, as well as some of the percentages are showing us that this trend of graduate nurses who are not graduating practice ready is actually getting worse, not better, after all of these years. In fact, research in 2005 showed the disconnect and the lack of graduates who are had entry-level skills of clinical judgment at 35% in 2005 with a study by Del Bueno. In 2017, Kavanaugh and Spida's Crisis in Competency article brought the number to 23% with a very large sample size of over 5,000 new graduate nurses, all who passed the NCLEX, but did not possess clinical judgment skills for practice. And in the follow-up study in 2021, Kavanaugh and Sharpneck, and I'm going to share that link in the chat. In that article, only 9%. They did follow-up studies with the Cleveland Clinic, which is where the study originated, and it declined from 23% and when it was published in 17. 4 years later, the gap continued to progress, and we do not have any follow-up data. But let it be said that we need to really, again, realize, with the needed transformation that Dr. Benner talked about back in 2010, educating nurses, a call for radical transformation, has really yet to be realized. And so today's discussion with Dr. Maria Flores-Harris is really going to be really encouraging to kind of look at what are some of the things that we can do differently to create a different culture in nursing education regarding teaching, learning, and how we evaluate our students. And are we inadvertently creating that culture? And so I'm going to just welcome and bring in Dr. Maria Flores-Harris. She is an accomplished registered nurse with over a decade of experience in long-term care and medical surg nursing, as well as a geriatric nurse practitioner. Received her Bachelor's of Science and Master's of Science as well as her geriatric nurse practitioner at Clemson. And if you're like a Texan, you don't mess with Texas, you don't mess with Clemson. If you're close to Maria, just have nothing but the highest regards. Other than that, she's also a clinical director and director of nursing program. In the past, she's also worked at Kaplan in executive leadership there in the past as a consultant and executive director of nursing. And now she has joined Keith RN, myself, and we are partnering together to blaze a trail to strengthen and transform how nursing is taught, and as a nurse educator consultant for Keith RN. So Maria, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. It's so good to have you here with us. And
happy to be here.
Yeah. And so I just, in our last conversation, we talked, let's kind of summarize, because I think that, for those that missed it, we talked a lot about, the problem of lack of academic integrity, plagiarism, and cheating within nursing education. We weren't pointing the finger at nurse educators saying that you're the problem, but we can inadvertently create a culture that encourages cheating. And could you kind of just recap the essence of that, just a nice thesis summary, and kind of we can build upon and that we can springboard as we discuss tonight's topic?
Sure, happy to. First of all, let me say that you and I both had a great conversation with an educator at Odin about this topic. We had an educator walk up to the table, put her hands on her hips, and say, "What do you mean that I'm the problem with my students cheating?" And we kind of just looked at one another. We thought that she was really mad, and then she started laughing. And she said, "I want you to know that you got my attention, and I wasn't able to attend. So I need you to tell me why I'm the problem. Why I'm the reason that my students are cheating." So we had a good laugh about it. But I began to explain to her what we talked about. And what we talked about is that, as Keith said, we have a tendency, whether we know it or not, to kind of cultivate an environment that is prone to allowing students to cheat. And what I mean by that is James Lang, who wrote the book Cheating Lessons that I spoke about last time, he said in his book that cheating is an expected behavior for a learning environment that is not working. The learning environment is not working because we sometimes give busy work to our students. In other words, we assign papers Even sometimes we do quizzes and tests, but papers, projects that don't meet our learning outcomes for the course. We just needed to do it. We needed another assignment. We needed another grade in the grade book, and we assigned it. Students know it's busy work, so they don't put in the effort. And why should they if it's not really meeting a learning outcome or an objective for a course? So that's one example. Another example is not providing timely and relevant feedback to our students. If we ask them to complete an assignment, a care plan, a test, and we're not giving them individualized, relevant feedback, again, why should they bother if they're not going to learn from what they're doing? And remember that giving feedback is part of the learning cycle. You have to be able to practice, perform, evaluate, get that feedback, and then you start the cycle over again based on the feedback that you receive. So if we're not giving that feedback, we're not helping the students learn. Why should they put in the effort if we're not really putting in the effort to grade? That's example number 2. Another thing is high stakes. We're really good about doing this in nursing school. We make everything high stakes. Everything is a summative assessment, no formative assessment. We expect you to get it right the first time. We expect you to get 100 on this quiz or else. We expect you to pass this exam or you can't graduate. If you put high stakes on an exam, and granted, I know some of you are out there probably thinking, well, NCLEX is high stakes. Well, NCLEX is different. NCLEX is a minimal competency exam. It's not an achievement test. It's about minimal competency. It's about keeping the public safe. It's a very different exam from the exams that we're giving in school. And again, if we're putting too much pressure and too high stakes on those exams, students are going to give you the grade no matter what. In other words, they're going to check that box. They're going to pass that test if it means I don't have a future if I don't pass the exam, and they're going to do it at whatever the cost. Also, another good reason, I say good reason, I think it's a good reason, anxiety and time constraints are a big reason that students cheat as well. So we need to help students with their anxiety levels, with managing their time, because if they get in a pinch and they need to turn in something tomorrow, that's when they might turn to the internet to help them with that paper or that assignment. And then lastly, I think we touched on this a little bit last time, but low self-efficacy and lacking metacognition skills is huge when it comes to cheating. In other words, if a student does not believe that they can do it, that's self-efficacy. If they don't believe that they can do it, and they have poor metacognition skills, in other words, they don't really know how to study, they don't know how they learn. So they're in this cycle of continuing to study in a way that is not working for them. That only lowers their self-efficacy more. And so they're in this cycle of preparing in the wrong way and failing and not doing well, increasing their lack of self-confidence. I shouldn't say increasing lack of self-confidence, but they're actually increasing their or decreasing their performance every time they take a test. And so they get in that cycle, and if they're going in believing that they can't do it and that they can't get any better, they don't have that growth mindset. Mm-hmm. Why not cheat? I can't do it on my own, so I may as well get someone else to help me or get someone else to do it for me. So we discussed all of those issues last time, and that's what I mean by us, the educators, being part of the problem, is if we're doing any of those things in our classroom, the busy work, the maybe not providing enough time, not addressing the anxiety, making everything high stakes, then we're contributing to the problem of academic misconduct.
And so then we're going to build on that, Maria, tonight with just kind of like, so what can we do to basically then, improve the learning environment and the processes that we're going to create that culture that is going to be conducive to versus, rote memorization versus learning. it's a great example of how students just memorize to get through the next test. But as we know, that memorization doesn't equate to understanding and doesn't equate to application. And we create that cycle by, the student, with just the things that you just shared. But before we get there, I want to know your why. Why are you so passionate about this topic? You basically, there's a reason why certain educators, even like myself, are passionate about closing the gap between nursing education and practice, because I witnessed it. I saw the consequences in practice, and I saw failure to rescue in real life as a rapid response nurse, and I saw dead patients after a nurse failed to recognize cues that led to a disastrous outcome. That'll put some fire in your bones. And that's where I kind of, that's where it started with me. But for you, Maria, what's your brief story? And then let's get into our topic. But I'd love to know your why, because there's a reason why you have this.
I hate to admit, but I probably became interested in academic integrity because I was dealing with academic misconduct. In a past life, we were beginning to deal with academic misconduct on an almost daily basis. We were hearing about it constantly. And first of all, it's disheartening. As a nurse who's been through nursing school, who holds the profession of nursing in very high regard, and am very proud to call myself a nurse, to know that we're dealing with people cheating every day is disheartening. It's something you don't want to have to think about and deal with, but it happens. So I think that initial shock of saying, okay, nursing is considered one of the most honest professions on the planet, and yet we have a cheating problem in nursing school. So there's a disconnect here. There's a problem here. What do we do about it? So I just started doing what I normally do, and I get interested in a topic. I started reading journals, reading books. I found out that there was an ICAI, an International Center for Academic Integrity, that at the time was actually housed at Clemson University. It has since been moved. But I became involved in that organization, joined the organization, started meeting people. And what I found is that we can't point the fingers and say bad students. Sometimes, yes, it's on the student, but we are contributors. And that was eye-opening to me. And I realized that I needed to get the message out about this, that if there are things that we can do as educators to help solve the problem, then we should be doing it. The other thing too is that you can't focus on prevention of the problem, because there are always going to be some bad apples that are going to cheat no matter what. There are always going to be people that are going to take advantage of situations if we make it easy for them to cheat. In other words, if we're turning our heads and not paying it any attention, if we don't want to talk about it, we don't want to address it, and we're making it easy, there are a lot of people that are going to take advantage of that. They're going to take the easy road. That's actually human nature, for us to find the easy road to take. So focusing on prevention, which is what I found that most people are doing. Most people want to know, well, how do I catch them? That is the wrong approach to take. Every expert out there on academic integrity will say that if you're trying to catch your students cheating, you've already lost the battle. We have to focus on prevention in the first place. And that, again, comes back to the educator. We have to cultivate an environment where learning is important, where education matters, so that students are engaged and motivated to learn. And if they are motivated and educated, motivated to learn, then they don't want to cheat. There is no need to cheat.
So then let's transition, Maria, and talk about how do we basically, what are the principles or foundation of creating that environment that really, that students want to learn and be engaged. One of the most common things that I hear from educators is that my students aren't engaged in the classroom. It's like, they just, that they just want to be spoon fed. They just want that information to pass the test. And it's like, so our students are coming with this expectation of just whatever that is. And sometimes we as educators enable that. How do we basically, kind of draw, how do we change this culture so that we draw out the best of our students? And in the process, we become the best educators, and embracing what that, what does that effective learning strategy and best practices look like for us as educators? So how do we encourage that? I mean, that to me seems like the $1 million question. If you could tap into that, you'd be a rich person. But the literature is clear, and you certainly have got some thoughts on that. And so, what can you really, let's talk about that.
Sure.
Break that down, and then let's make it practical. So maybe just kind of looking at big picture principles, and then how do we operationalize it next semester? We're kind of at the end of a semester for most of us. We're kind of like winding down. We have a new year and a new semester next month. So we have an opportunity as educators who are listening to this to again implement some of these things next month to make a needed difference. And so let's kind of lay the foundation of what that looks like, Maria. I'd love your thoughts.
So let me start broad, and then we'll get a little more specific. Broadly speaking, the best way to decrease academic misconduct is to focus on learning rather than performance. And that's what this is really about tonight, is cultivating an environment where students are engaged and motivated to learn, and that we are allowing them the practice that they need to learn, and that our focus is on learning and not performance. What I'm really talking about is that we're not focused on grades. And we'll get into more specifics about how we can do that. But overall, we have to consider that we focus on learning rather than a grade. And they really don't go hand in hand. And let me just give you some food for thought on this. If you don't believe that we're not focused on performance, because sometimes I get feedback about that, no, I mean, we have to have grades, but of course we're focused on learning. But are we really? Ask your students a question. Ask yourself the question first, but then go to your students and ask your students a question. If I give you a scenario, if this is me talking to my students, that would you work harder to get an A on a test or to prepare to teach a topic in class? Now, as an instructor, sometimes we think, oh, well, God, of course we would spend so much more time preparing for a topic in class. Well, yeah, we're the teachers. We're supposed to. But students, if they have a test tomorrow and they have a presentation that they're going to teach in another class, ask them how much time they're going to spend on the presentation versus how much time they're going to spend studying. You're going to hear that they're going to spend time studying for a test. So why are they spending their time studying on a test? Well, because they've got to get a good grade, right? Because if they don't get a good grade, they may not progress to the next course. They may not graduate. They may not get the scholarship or be able to keep their scholarship or get the internship that they were looking for. So they're motivated for a grade because of all the external issues that I just mentioned. So we as a higher education system put all the focus on grades. We reward based on grades. We don't reward based on learning. And I'll give you some more examples, but think about that. I'll give you some specific examples as we look at some specific strategies. But just think about that overall, we're rewarding performance. So of course, students are going to focus on performance. We have to kind of, I guess, reel that back in and say, you know what, I'm going to have to give you permission to fail sometimes. I'm going to have to give you more formative assessments so that you can practice and get feedback and improve. That's part of the learning process, is the formative assessment, getting the feedback, putting that feedback into use, and then improving. So there's a lot of research out there. There's educational psychology. There's academic integrity, of course, research, but all of it says that if a student is focused on performance, then they are not focused even on what they're learning. And I like to use this example with us nurses, because I hear this, I hear people talk about this all the time. They have a student that's making straight A's in the classroom, but they get to clinical and they don't know how to find their way down the hallway without assistance. And then vice versa. You have the student who's struggling in class, barely making C's to stay in class, but you get them in clinical and they can run circles around every other student. They know what to do in clinical. That just proves that grades and performance are not valuable, really. I don't want to say they're meaningless, but they don't hold the value that we think they do. So I throw that out there just again for some more food for thought, that we're focusing on grades, and grades probably really aren't the correct thing to focus on. Grades are not created equal either. You think about it. Does an A in a med-surg nursing course mean the same as an A in an English course? Does an A in your med-surg course mean the same as an A in the college down the street's med-surg course? Probably not. They're not created equal. So again, we're so focused on these grades, but what do these grades really mean when we have scenarios just like the ones that I talked about? So we have to focus on the learning, and then the learning is where we get into a lot of the specifics. If we're really going to focus on learning, then what does that mean exactly? It means that we minimize grading. What does that mean exactly? And we can get into some specifics there. But I wonder, Keith, do we have any comments or questions?
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's kind of like, I want to just kind of say, as I'm listening to Maria, I have a lot of questions that are like percolating in my head. But those that are watching live, you know what? Put your questions in the chat, because you know what? You are blessed to be able to get a live response from Maria. And I know that many of you are kind of saying, well, then like, what shall we then do? Like how, it's like, what do we do with our percentage bars and all the things that we have put such credence in? It's like, I want you to ask those questions because we want to dialogue with this. This is a really important, this is, I think, an essential topic that is needed to radically transform nursing education. Now, Dr. Benner didn't talk about this specifically, but we've got to recognize that the need to radically transform isn't just about, developing clinical judgment. It's about changing academic culture that may be weakening and hindering our students' learning. And so I got Megan. Megan, thank you for the question. She let's just kind of put her question on the screen. Asked, how do you introduce this in a pre-nursing course? What do you focus on here? And so I think that's the big question I had, Maria, when you say, okay, if we're not going to put this, I mean, what do we do with percentage grading? I think that's one kind of thing that's in my noodle. Mm-hmm. But then how do you operationalize and make it practical? How do we basically, then assess learning differently in a pre-nursing course, and therefore any course that we teach in nursing education? Mm-hmm. So let's start with Megan's question and begin that, and let's kind of love your thoughts, Maria.
So let's talk about some specific strategies. And Megan, this could be for a pre-nursing course or a nursing course. I think it's the same for any course when we start talking about the actual grades. So one of the first things that you can do is, when I say minimize grading, I know we have to have grades to go in a grade book, but let's put in a little more formative assessment. So in other words, let's give an assignment, let's give a quiz, and instead of giving a grade, let's give feedback. Give relevant, good, individualized feedback that that student can take back and improve. That's one way. That's one easy way to do something, is to give a quiz, give an assignment, do something in class even, but don't give them a grade. Give them feedback so they can improve. The other thing that we can do is we can allow for more than one quiz or more than one test. So in other words, they could take a quiz, and if they don't do well, they could re-quiz or retest, but they need to get the feedback first so they can improve, and then they take another test or another quiz. You can also minimize grading on a test. So, I'm used to, in nursing school, usually we have 4 or 5 exams in a semester. What if we took one exam in one semester? So this is kind of just a pilot to work into minimizing grading, or ungrading is what some people are calling it. Take one exam, and that one exam, you take it up, you give feedback to the student. Don't put a score on it. Don't mark right or wrong. Just give some feedback on this. This is good. This isn't. This is where you went wrong here. Just give feedback. Give the test back to the student. Let them go back to the table with your feedback. Provide you with remediation. You can decide what that remediation looks like. Maybe it's a case study. Maybe it is just answering the question in another way, but have them do the remediation, then come back and give it to you, and then you can give them some points for the remediation. You can, of course, you can then go back and give them a grade on the exam if you want, or they can take another exam. But it's really all about giving feedback, minimizing the grade. Something I will tell you guys, this book, Ungrading by Susan Bloom, it's a fairly new book. It's a 2020 book by Susan, I think I say Bloom, it might be Blum, B-L-U-M, but it's called Ungrading. This book gives you very specific examples. And something that some instructors do is they give a test, they grade the test and give feedback, but they also give a copy to the student to grade and give feedback. And then they compare, they come together and compare those grades and the feedback. And if the students are within, say, 5 points of what the instructor was, then they get like an extra 5 points on their exam, because that shows a growth mindset, and that shows that they have good evaluation skills, and they are able to basically self-evaluate themselves. So when we talk about minimizing grading, we're really putting a big focus on the growth mindset and building metacognitive skills and on formative assessment. But those are 2 specific things that you can do. Giving feedback on a test without giving a grade, or maybe giving grade and feedback, but allowing the student to come back and improve that grade. Minimizing the amount of quizzes and assignments that you're giving for a grade and giving feedback instead. Give students choice on the type of assignments that they can do. If you have a paper in a class, could a student do a presentation or a video and still meet the objective without having to write if they're not a good writer, and vice versa? So giving students choices is a big incentive in this as well. So those are 2 things. And I've got some more, but I don't know if we have any questions or comments on those 2, because those 2 are the most radical. When you say to somebody, don't give them a grade, give them feedback and let them learn from their feedback, sometimes people are like, whoa.
And what I'd like to clarify, Maria, are the type of questions that we should be asking our students to get that feedback. Because when I look at a traditional exam and a typical 4 or 5 point item multiple choice, it's either right or wrong. There's no analysis of their thinking, their metacognition skills. I feel that, when I look at the case studies that I've written, they're open-ended questions using Tanner's framework of clinical judgment, but they're open-ended, so you can assess their thinking processes by an essay type response. So when we're looking at examinations, are you advocating then basically more of an essay type of an exam where you can assess their response versus a multiple choice? That's the traditional exam. Could you just kind of clarify that? And
yeah. I think you need to include essay, short answer type questions, because that is the only way that you get to a student's thinking and reasoning. So you can actually see where they're going right and wrong in their thinking. You can't see that on a multiple choice. So I think having some of those I know people are not probably going to go all open-ended questions, but here's the thing: you can add some in to see where they're going with their going right or wrong with their thinking. The other thing that you can do, though, I think this is where the feedback and the remediation piece is so important. Give the students the feedback that they need to improve, and then give them an open-ended case study to do for remediation, rather than multiple choice questions. Because again, multiple choice questions, you're going to have to go pull all of that information out of the student. Now, what were you thinking here? Why did you think that? If they're writing it out, you can actually see that. So doing a case study, a low fidelity simulation, that is the way to remediate and truly understand that a student is thinking in the right way and reasoning in the right way and actually building their clinical judgment. So absolutely, those open-ended questions. And I think using case studies and low fidelity simulation for remediation is the way to go.
Yeah, but that's kind of the way that I've structured all the cases within Keith RN. Basically, not really recognizing that alignment, Maria, but yet it also just kind of it makes sense, and that you can really, make that alignment in that thinking. So Megan, she says thank you, and so you know what, I'll just put on the screen, Maria. There you go, you answered her question. Kristen's got a question I want to throw up there. Kristen says this: in lieu of grades, how do you determine that the students met the outcomes? Great question, Kristen. Thank you for sharing. So Maria,
that is a great question, Kristen. And it's all about getting that feedback from the student. You're still going to have to give a grade, right? I mean, we all have grades that we have to put in a grade book in order for a student to pass. But you can give feedback and still give a grade at the end, but you've already gone through the feedback remediation process to get to the grade. So in other words, you didn't just here's what happens with a grade, guys. When you give a grade, learning ends. If you give feedback, learning continues. When a student sees a grade, if it's a good grade, what do? Know that, let me move on, right? I'm not going to look at that anymore. If they get a bad grade, they might still do the same thing. They may say, well, that's done and over, I'm going to move on. But if we don't give a grade and we give feedback and we let that student remediate, again, if we do it with open-ended questions, we're really helping with that clinical judgment development and seeing their thinking and reasoning process. Then at that point, you feel more comfortable that the student has really learned what they need to learn, and then you can put a grade on it at that point, because we have to put some sort of grade, I realize, in order to say, yep, they've met the outcomes. But if the focus is the grade, then, as I said, you give a grade and that learning ends. If the focus is learning, we're going to give feedback. We're going to ensure that they've learned, and you continue the learning until you've got a grade that you really are comfortable with. I'll leave it there and just see if there's any, because I actually, what I was about to say probably kind of goes into something else. So I want to make sure, Kristen, that answered your question. and helped. If not, please give us a follow-up question.
Yeah, she says thank you, Maria. But yeah, well, one of the things that I thought about, Maria, as you're talking, one of the paradigm shifts that Dr. Benner talked about in educating nurses is that we need to integrate classroom and clinical learning. But, when I heard you talk about just coaching our students, it really reminded me that, in the clinical environment, we as educators are clinical coaches. We are, we provide the feedback. We see their performance. We're providing feedback. We're giving them a chance to demonstrate, their correction. We're evaluating their thinking based on their on their clinical paperwork. We have a very much of a coaching mindset in clinical. And what I hear you saying is that we need to bring that same aspect of being a clinical coach. We need to bring that into our classroom. Absolutely. And to be a classroom coach as we can and as we're able. But then this is the $1 million question that Mary asked before I said this. How do you do this with a large class when you have like X amount? When I was, my ADN class, 80 students. Okay. It was an auditorium. Some programs are smaller, some are even larger. So when you're looking at workload, Maria, this is now the brass tacks. It's kind of like, this is reality. If we're going to be brutally honest, why do we rely on multiple choice questions and 99% of our exams in our nursing program in the classroom? It's because we can just Scantron them, done. So how do we basically, when you look at workload, this is a really, really important question. And how do we take the best practices and then make it when you have larger class loads? What are some of your thoughts on that? How do we split this baby and kind of accomplish a double win here?
So several things. One, even though we have large classes, most of us have small, either advising groups or clinical groups. So that's always a good place to start, in that if your students are in clinical groups, be sure that your clinical instructors, your adjunct instructors, full-time, whoever they are, that they know how to give proper feedback. And I've even worked in facilities where the clinical instructors would review the exam with the students and help them with remediation because it's smaller courses. You also usually have advise students that you advise, and that's a small group of students. And I've worked in facilities where the person who advises the student is the one who actually goes over the feedback and exams and such. If none of that works, the other thing that you can do is do group work, collaboration in the classroom. So put students together in groups to do a case study or to do some sort of remediation or active learning activity, and then you be the guide who is just going around, listening and providing coaching and mentoring in that way. But what that does as well is students learn from one another. So I sometimes had to be very purposeful with my groups. I would have to assign my groups so that, we didn't have all the students that were struggling in the same group because they couldn't help one another. So sometimes you have to strategically assign those groups, but you can do that. And then students are learning from one another. They get the benefit of learning from one another. A lot of times they will form study groups that work because they've got the strong students and the struggling students in those groups. And then that works and helps that struggling student. But doing group work is another way in large classes to at least be able to go around and give some feedback to the group and for them to give feedback to one another. If you work in a facility where you have TAs or some sort of grad assistants, or I know that a lot of schools are actually providing student mentors. So, the upperclassmen are mentoring the lowerclassmen. Use them. And it may require that the mentors have to go through a little bit of training to help those students. But what I found too, I've worked with a few schools where they will give the upperclassmen, if they decide to mentor, they're getting some sort of credit, maybe class credit, extra credit to mentor the younger students. And then they have that time to learn how they should properly give feedback. So I hear you. Workload is an issue, I think, for almost anyone who's a nurse educator.
Yeah.
I hate to say this, but I mean, it's too important for us to say that we don't have time. We have to get creative and find some ways to give them that feedback. Feedback is a part of the learning cycle. And if they're not getting relevant feedback, then the learning cycle's broken. And they're not getting the advantage of having the expert, us. They're not getting the advantage of having us in the classroom if they're not getting our feedback.
Right. No, well said, Maria. And if there's any other questions that those of you that are watching live, please put in the chat here. We'll get to every question before the end of this presentation. Maria, are there other strategies when you look at the learning environment that you'd like to share? Is there anything else that?
There are a couple of things that I want to hit on. One thing that always comes up in ungrading is, you've got someone that says, you know what, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. This is different. It's radical, but I need to try this. I need to implement more formative assessment. I need to give my students some choices. I need to take the focus off of grading. Well, the reason that a lot of people get skeptical about this, I would say, or anxious about this, is because of course evaluations. If you try something daring, something different, and the students don't like it, you get retaliation, right, on your course evaluations. So I think it's important to speak to that and say that if you're going to try this, talk to your administration, get them on your side, explain to them why you're doing it. And be sure that they're including questions in the evaluations that are focused on teaching and learning, not just, did you like this? Did you not like that? But ask about actual faculty behaviors. Does the instructor consistently arrive on time? Does the instructor provide you with relevant feedback? Ask specific questions related to learning, not just what students like and don't like, because research says students notoriously don't like the things that actually help them learn, because the things that actually help them learn require effort. So they may not like it, but it's good for them. The other thing too is ask about student behavior. So ask, in the evaluations, ask, do students in your class actually use unauthorized aids or collaborate on assignments when they shouldn't? Do students come to class in clinical prepared to do the day's work? Ask questions that are related to actual teaching and learning. So you've got to have some administration support there. And the last thing I'll say is, don't implement without talking to your students and telling them why you're doing it. Share the research with the students that this works. Share that you're doing this for their benefit because you want them to learn this information. It's vital that they learn it, and you want to ensure that they learn it before they walk out of your classroom. So share that information with them and be sure that they understand why you're doing it, why it's important, that it's going to work, and talk to them about why it's important that they buy in and do the work. I think sometimes we forget that. Sometimes we think we're the teachers, we know best, we're going to do it. And maybe sometimes we forget to share the why with the students. And you guys know today's generation, they're going to ask the why. So you got to tell them the why.
Yeah. And, I would just kind of say, Maria, as we step back on the why, we've got to kind of, again, bring that, it's all about the patient. It's all about safe patient care, to be the best nurse that you can be, to care for someone of infinite value and worth, so you don't harm them inadvertently. And you can even kill an innocent human life by failure to rescue. It's all about the patient. And I think that's where we really need to have a patient-centered emphasis in nursing education, that we've lost some of that with the diploma programs and the centrality of practice. Nursing's become more academic, NCLEX, academic, and we've lost sight of the patient and preparing our students for practice. So let's get back, let's put the patient back as the center, the sun, that everything we do orbits around. That's just my thoughts.
Absolutely.
Well, we got some great questions here and some comments, so let's pop them in the chat. Cheryl has this. Just thank you for addressing the issue of course evaluations. Definitely the elephant in the room and a barrier for faculty adopting innovations that stimulate student learning, as well as active learning, case-based learning that makes them think. We've all, I've gotten that feedback for years, and that resistance to active learning. So you were spot on, Maria. But yeah, any comment or anything you'd just like to acknowledge there, or just more of an acknowledgement that, hey.
No, I know it's a problem. I mean, it is a huge barrier because your life depends on your course evaluations, right? I mean, are you going to continue with your job? So it is a huge barrier, and that's why administration has got to be on board and has to support you.
Yeah.
And that's why you have to have those conversations. Yeah.
Absolutely. That's that support that if we have a culture in our nursing program that values educational best practices, active learning, promoting a learning environment like we're talking about tonight, this is best practice. This is not like some, way out metaphysical theory. This is just nuts and bolts. Then we've got to, if there's a support for that, then Maria, you're absolutely right that we should, in a healthy culture, you'll be supported despite student feedback that may not be, because they don't know what's good for them. So
right. Well, they don't. Right. No, the research says that, the literature supports.
Why are we even allowing the inmates to run the asylum in nursing education? We've got to change that culture, Maria. That's another topic. Not tonight, because we should not be weighting student evaluations the way that they currently are weighted. Now, I'm not saying ignore student feedback.
Right. No.
We need to weight it and consider the source.
Right.
These are not my peers. These are not expert educators. These are not expert nurses. These are novice nurses who don't even have a clue what it means to be a nurse. And it's our goal don't get me started. So I'll stop. But I do have a question and I have a comment that Jessica has. So let's get Jessica's comment in the chat. Sometimes she says this, that students don't understand the method to the madness, but each generation learns differently, and even each cohort that comes through requires different methods. The evaluation piece comes into play to guide these discussions. And so what would be your thoughts or any comments, Maria, to that?
No, I agree with that. Jessica is so right. And she, she's thinking about people as individuals. Every individual is different. Yeah. And you're right. They do require different methods. And I think that's where choice comes in, and allowing them some choice, treating them like an adult. They are adults. Whether they act like it or not, whether their parents have to show up or not, they are adults. Yeah. And we need to treat them as such. Yeah. And they do have to be taught differently. Absolutely. Yep.
And, I would say kind of like just a thought about the feedback, Maria, just like in clinical coaching, if the student knows that you value them, you care for them, you have their best interests at heart for you to be the best possible nurse, even if you're providing constructive feedback, it will be received. But we've got to create kind of a caring climate within our education programs where our students know that our feedback, that you're advocating, that we provide that formative, ongoing feedback, that we really are, that our interests are for their success and support, that we're doing it for their good, like a parent who cares about their child. We're not, we're not their antagonists or we're not their nemesis. Right. And I think there's an adversarial relationship that's, I don't know why, how we can, that we need to be aware of, that we've got to kind of, yes, we're still the educators, but, we've got to treat our students in a way that promotes that healthy, respectful, civil approach. So.
We have to provide a safe environment. And by safe, I mean, we have to make it okay for them to fail. We have to make it okay for them not to know something and ask a question. That's what I mean by safe environment is we you know what? We screw up sometimes. I say things wrong sometimes. I have to say, you know what, guys, I was wrong. I told you wrong. You have to role model the behavior that you want to see. You have to make it okay for them to be wrong, for them not to know. And that's where formative assessment comes in again. It's okay if you take this quiz and fail it, because I'm going to give you feedback so that you can get better and you'll do better next time.
Yep, absolutely. Well, Maria, I don't know where this hour has gone. We have just a few minutes left. We're going to wrap it up here in closing, but there's a couple of things I feel are really important that I want to kind of close with. Number one, we've got, for many of us educators, I'm coming from Minnesota where our winter break is very long and the blizzard snows are soon to come, though they did not come today. It was 50 degrees out, but it's coming. We need some winter reading, regardless of where we live. And so I want to just, you mentioned a couple books in our discussion, and I would just, the first one I have is How Learning Works. Could you just kind of, I'm going to pop that in the chat, the link to Amazon. Could you basically kind of highlight that real quick?
Yeah, so the How Learning Works is, it's 7 research-based principles for how students learn. That was the first book I ever read on learning science. And it was the book, like last time I mentioned that cheating lessons really changed my world when it came to academic integrity. How Learning Works changed my world when it came to learning science. That's what made me realize that as an educator, I needed to know how learning science works, and I needed to put it into practice in my classroom. And students need to understand it as well.
And the second book you mentioned was Small Teaching, Everyday Lessons from the Science of Learning.
Yep. So James Lang, who wrote Cheating Lessons, wrote a book on small teaching. And it is really about putting the learning science into practice in the classroom. And he breaks it down so that you can understand it as an instructor, and then you can explain it to your students. So again, it's all about understanding how your brain works, how it's going to take in knowledge, how it's going to move that knowledge, say, from short term to long term, which is what we need to focus on in nursing. Students cannot do the get it, spit it, forget it method of study. They have to remember this information. And so that book is a really great way for you to understand how to put the principles of learning science into practice. And talk to your students about it.
Excellent. And so in closing, Maria, just if you're just to summarize or give us maybe your top 1 to 3 takeaways. If there's, one of the things of learning science and cognitive load, which I love this science of learning theory, that we can give too much information, but if we can have a nice hour-long conversation, if there's like a 3-point sermon, there are like 1 to 3 things we must never forget from this time that we spent together in this hour. What would be the 1, 2, or 3 things that every nurse educator must never forget, that are the essential takeaways that we need to then kind of percolate and think about and reflect upon how we can operationalize that in our unique content in our program? So I want you to kind of just, maybe I put you on the spot, but I just want you to kind of distill what is the essential, non-negotiable, best practice takeaways that every educator needs to take to the bank.
Focus on learning over performance. Do that by incorporating more formative assessment. So give your students permission to fail. Give your students permission to not know something. So, and then thirdly, I think third is kind of a wrap up. But I know that when we think about ungrading or even minimizing grading, that it is a huge paradigm shift, and it's a huge transformation. But when I think about the fact that NCSBN said that only 20% of the nursing workforce thinks that graduates are ready to practice, I think, what have we got to lose? We need some radical transformation to occur. So what do we have to lose if 80% of the students that we're graduating are not practice ready? So I say we've got room for improvement. So let's go for it.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad that we had this time together, Maria. Thank you for sharing these insights. I would just like to just close with highlighting just that, you mentioned kind of indirectly some of the resources that we offer at Keith RN, which is over 350 unfolding case studies with open-ended responses already created with answer keys, PowerPoints for faculty. Students get access at no additional cost. Have a membership platform that thousands of educators are currently using. I'd love to just, if you're not familiar with it, thinklikeanurse.com. I have a coupon code for an individual membership that if you haven't checked it out, you know what, you can go month to month, check it out, and really see for yourself just the value of just what these time-saving resources offer educators. And if you have a program that you'd like a program quote, Maria works as a consultant for Keith RN to do integration work with any new program. So if your program's interested, we can, she can support you further in that journey. So I just wanted to highlight that, and as well as just close with any other questions that might be coming from the audience. If there's any last thoughts, comments, I want to just kind of have a last call. And we'll say, Maria, I think that, next month is January 11th, will be our Facebook Live. And I'd love to talk more, I think, about the science of learning and how that relates to just continuing this journey of just how we can, more effectively teach nursing and nursing education, so our students are ready, for practice at the most possible level possible. For the, we can't do it all, but we can do better. And I think for every educator, our motto should be never stop improving. And we can do that. And I think we have an ethical and moral imperative to do so, knowing that patient lives and outcomes are dependent on how well we prepare our graduates for practice. And so with that, I don't see any further comments. Maria, thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure as always. And thank you for being a part of all that we do at Keith RN. Much appreciated. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all for what you're doing. Have a wonderful and a blessed Christmas Advent season. Thank you. Take care.